funny because before you came on, Derek, we were talking about if you think the Nephilim migrated to the beach like humans do. Like, all right, let's pack up and move south.
Let's go eat. Yeah, they're gonna go eat some people, not some beach dwelling people.
Because they're always on these tropical islands, right?
Well, I think we're gonna find out. They like the islands, yes.
Hey, look at the guy. He's a pro. He's transitioning.
Look at that transition. So, welcome to the show, Derek Olson again from Megalithic Marvels. We just scratched the surface with you when we talked Jed Burton and you on the double episode. And Luke and I were texting after that, like, man, we got to have him back on. That was so good. I felt like we were just getting into it. So our listeners are familiar with you. And if you guys don't follow Megalithic Marvels on Instagram, you're missing out on a ton of action. We're all
friend of the show now. Friend of the show.
We're all
Derek Olson.
Yeah.
And I'm honored to be a friend of the show. Honored to be back, guys. It's always really enjoying the Blurry Creatures podcast. Lots of fun. Loving the Instagram account. Not only do you get some great information, but man, you laugh a lot watching that. So this is great. Yeah, let me start out with a question. So when I say the word Easter Island or the words, what's the first thing that you guys think of? What pops into your head?
Some Moai. It's those big old stone things, heads, which actually are bodies. If you do a little research.
Right. Yeah.
I think of that NES game Gradius.
You would.
Remember that one? You're flying the spaceship through and there's those statues and you shoot them. Remember?
Yeah, go Luke, man. He said it right on the Moai. Yeah. And you guys both essentially said the same thing. You think of these giant monster statues on the island known as the Moai, right? And they're so iconic. I mean, they're ingrained really into the fabric of our modern pop culture. And therefore, most people I've found don't even realize the statues themselves point to so much more mystery and intrigue regarding this incredible ancient island civilization. So there's so much about this island. I think, man, we can devote a full show to it. How does it sound to you guys?
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about
Luke's ready. I mean, Luke changed the backdrop.
I've been waiting for this.
And here's the carrot. After exhaustive research, I have uncovered possible evidence that suggests that giant blurry creatures were seen as recent as the 1700s roaming the shores of Easter Island.
Oh, that's the intro. I'll put a little music to that.
Dude, I like that. I mean, think about a better place for those things to survive. That would be on an island, right? When they're being hunted, the idea is they were hunted. Like here in North America by the Native Americans and regular sized folks to extinction. But if you're on an island, you got to get out there.
First, talk about the island and all of its megalithic mysteries, because like I said, there's so much. And I've done some pretty exhaustive research. I've written a kind of an investigative 3-part series on Easter Island.
Love it.
And so the island, I mean, if you look at Google Maps, you're going to see it's pretty small. It's like 7 miles by 5 miles by 10 miles in size, but it's like the most remote inhabited island in the world. So it's like 2,000 plus miles from the coast of Chile. And what's crazy is the first Europeans ever recorded to have visited Easter Island, it was a Dutch guy named Jacob Roggeveen, and he arrived to the island in 1722. And he was originally on his way to find the fabled land. It was called Terra Australis. They thought that this place existed. And so he was on his way to look for this fabled land. Instead, he bumps into Easter Island. And it happened to be Easter Sunday, April 5th, 1722. And that's why he called it Easter Island. And most people have heard, it has a Polynesian name as well, Rapa Nui, which I think translates to Great Rapa. And something interesting about the word Rapa, there's another island directly west of Easter Island, and it's called Rapa Iti. And there's some crazy oral traditions that have survived claiming that Rapa Iti, the island west of Easter Island, had been settled by pregnant women escaping wars and massacres on Easter Island. So kind of something interesting there to keep in your back pocket.
How do you do your research? How do you dig? I mean, how do you find this stuff? That's the question I had.
Oh man, I start by I just collect sources, and then I'm kind of looking at their sources, and then I'm kind of cross-checking. So a lot of my research is based for this Easter Island is based off of the work of explorer Thor Heyerdahl, who's one of the great explorers. He was living, he went to Easter Island in the 50s and did kind of the first major excavations. And so I like his writings because he was kind of an out of the box thinker. And again, he conducted some of the first excavations there, but he wrote stuff before everything was really politicized and politically correct. And so I'm basing a lot of this off of his findings, his book, and then cross-checking a lot of his references. And so that's kind of, I guess, the short answer.
Do you feel like a lot of that material, like, for instance, like newspapers used to write about digging up skeletons, and some of these, we found a couple of these books that talk about this stuff too, that there was a time from like late 1700s to the early 1900s where you could still print your thoughts about these things, and now all of a sudden you can't? Is that a theme when you're doing your research?
Absolutely. People who actually print their thoughts today are, considered alternative researchers, right? I guess I would fall into that category. A lot of people you've had on your show, they'd be considered alternative because they don't fit into the mainstream narrative. And so, yeah, again, that's why I like a lot of my sources for this. And I'm gonna actually hit on sources that go way back to the 1700s, some of these first explorers that were on the island. And so I feel like we're getting a way clearer, obviously, picture from them than people that just go and visit today and filter it all through a paradigm.
Yeah, I love that. One of my thoughts, that one of the only things I really remember seeing is the pictures of them getting those statues getting dug up. And you can see, like, you only see the top of their head, and they go, looks like they go like 20, 30 feet down into the dirt. And you just, and my initial thought was just like, how could they get buried that deep, unless there was a massive flood?
So Roggeveen in 1722, he and his crew show up, and they report seeing about 3,000 what they call natives back then. They were covered in tattoos, body paint, feathers. And remember this, they had ears so long that they hung down to their shoulders. And they were performing strange ritual type worship around fires in front of these giant statues, which just blew the minds of these Dutch explorers. So that's kind of our first snapshot of seeing, real people on the island right there. And then another crazy thing to point out about Easter Island out of the gate here is that there's evidence to suggest that it was once an ancient tropical forest. And there's professors like, there's a guy named Dr. Olaf Selling from the Swedish Museum of Natural History. This guy examined the stratified deposits from the crater swamps there on the island under a microscope, and he was able to determine that the island had basically once been covered by forest flora and trees that later became extinct. And a lot of the oral traditions back this up. There's talk of the island as once just this lush jungle. So that also lends to what happened to this ancient island oasis, and does this connect with why the Moai might be buried? Okay, so here's where it gets crazy. Let's talk about the strange genetic features of some of the island inhabitants. So many early explorers of the island, like Roggeveen and Captain Cook, they reported about, the unusual shaped skulls, and not only skulls, but large bumps found on the back of the necks of island inhabitants. And you can do a Google search of this, but there's a number of really old, highly detailed carvings made of wood that have been found around the world in museums now, and they depict these strange features. And these carvings are said to represent the ancient ancestors that existed before these inhabitants, right? So they've got strange skulls. They've got weird bumps on the back of their necks that bulge out. And so you got to ask, right? Why do these ancient ancestors look so strange, so odd? So that's something to remember. And a lot of people, did you guys know that there's a lost language that was found on Easter Island?
No.
I mean, like we talk about Legends of Zelda. How do you find a lost language? That's what I want to know. Just like carvings and.
Yeah, they're called the Rongo Rongo tablets. And there was so, you know, hundreds of years ago, there was missionaries that moved to the island, right, to save the island inhabitants. One guy's name was Eugene Irod. He lived there in the 1860s, and he was the first to discover that Easter Islanders, or you could say the Rapa Nuians, once had their own inscribed script called Rongo Rongo that was like indigenous to themselves. And these glyphs include pictographic and geometric shapes. But despite like crazy numerous attempts, nobody can really decipher them. So that's what I mean by lost. We've found them, but nobody can quite read them. But it's pretty crazy. It just adds to the intrigue and mystery of the island that there is this lost language. 1886, there was an explorer named William Thompson, shows up on the island. And I was telling you about these Rongo Rongo tablets. This guy succeeded in finding 2 of these hidden tablets. And he purposed to save whatever memory the island elders still had of the tablets and the origin. So the island elders couldn't necessarily read them, but they could remember the oral traditions related to some of these symbols. And so the oral traditions we learned from that assert that there was a guy named Hota Matawa who was the first king, and he possessed the knowledge of this written language. And Hota Matawa had apparently been a very powerful king in a land ravaged by wars. And so this guy flees where he was, embarks with a couple hundred followers on ships, and they come to Easter Island. Hota Matua shows up, but the oral traditions say that when he showed up, what does he find on the island? He finds a graveyard of tombs, and finds out that this island had once been inhabited long before he arrived. And that brings us to what I call the long-eared master builders. So remember I said that when Jacob Roggeveen saw these inhabitants on the island in the 1700s, they had long ears down to their shoulders, right? Well, it seems that they were emulating the long-eared master builders. And Thor Heyerdahl, the great explorer who showed up there in the 50s to Easter Island, did a lot of research on this. And so I'm pulling from some of that. So the oral traditions of the islanders state that the island was settled twice. The first time by a race known as the Long-Ears, and they are said to have come from the east. What is to the east of, Easter Island? It's Chile, it's Peru, it's that area, right? The second time, the island was settled by the Short Ears from the west, and I'm thinking these were probably the Polynesians who arrived from Tahiti around 1,000 years ago. And so that would be Hota Matawa. We don't know for sure if there was an overlap between the two cultures, but there's a lot of information on the Long-Ears, who they appear to have been a power in the land in an early period, ancient period in history. And the oral traditions kind of hint that the Short Ears were more laborers, while the Long Ears were the master builders of the larger statues. We'll talk about how there's kind of 2 different statues. There's there's what seems to be much giant older statues and then more recent smaller ones. And so the more giant statues, as well as the megalithic walls and the Ahu platforms, seem to have been created and crafted by the long years. And so pretty crazy stuff. So does King Hotamatawa come from the west and represent the later period short-eared inhabitants? And were the long years of the east associated with the master builders of Peru and Bolivia? I think so, because when you look at what the Spanish chroniclers recorded in their stories about the legendary Sun King, they called him Kon-Tiki. And to the Inca, he was known as Viracocha. And he and his followers, they were credited with bringing civilization to Peru and in the areas of Bolivia. And they were said to have had white skin, long ears, beards, like Nate, and said to have built megalithic structures. Let's talk about the white skin cannibalistic priesthood. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
That's a conversation
right up
killer.
our alley. Let's go.
Is that how you lead into a dinner party, Derek? Like when you're sitting down and you're like, "Hey guys, so happy to be here tonight. Let's talk about the cannibals."
The white-skinned cannibalistic priesthood. No, seriously, this is for real. So in the 1700s, again, we go back to the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, and he was exploring with a guy named Carl Frederick Behrens. They both, wrote diaries about their expeditions to the island. So these guys recorded, and again, I think this carries some weight because these are the first explorers from Europe. This is 1700s, and they recorded their observations of how when they came to the island, they saw these giant megalithic Moai statues, right? But then they observed that the statues were served by a priesthood, they called it, of, quote, very large, end quote, looking men who had remarkably white skin, long ears, and red hair.
Oh.
And they found it so interesting that while the rest of the population appeared to be of a mixed descent, and they did not venerate the statues as the priests did. So pretty crazy, right? And then there's a guy named Father Gaspard Zumbaum, another kind of missionary guy who lived there in the 1800s. And he wrote about the island, and he had diaries, and he wrote that in former times, these high priests ate children in the name of their god Make.
Oh boy.
So he corroborates what Roggeveen wrote about 100 years later. And then excavations on the landward side of the Ahu Nana site have revealed charred human bones from cannibalistic rituals. So there was definitely cannibalism happening on this island. And so my question is, dude, who were these large, long-eared, white-skinned, red-haired, cannibalistic priests? Were they descendants of the long ears that were still living in the 1700s? Were they some sort of genetic hybrid? What do you guys think about that?
I think that everything you're describing from the historical record falls right in line with the things we know about the behavior of the giants, from bloodlust to cannibalism to human sacrifice and really what sounds like an occult type worship that has all the earmarks, pun intended, of the giants.
I mean, honestly, this is the first time I've heard about giant ears. We've heard about giant everything else, but I haven't heard anything about giant ears yet. I mean, it sounds like a vegan sandwich shop in Brooklyn. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or like maybe you'll see some down at the Whole Foods.
But I have not heard the giants have giant ears. I mean, is it stretching, you think, or is it just they are giant ears?
No, I think it's I think
Sorry, I don't mean to be too. I'm just that's
I think it's long ears. I think the later peoples were emulating these the earliest inhabitants, the founders, the long ears, who may have stretched their ears, but certainly the later peoples, I think, were emulating these. But the key is, man, the reports of large stature, red hair, white skin. Again, that doesn't jive with Easter Island was inhabited by Polynesians, right? But getting back to the megaliths, this is where it gets crazy, because I remember I was mind blown when I found out that, on Easter Island are megalithic mortalist walls, just like you'd see in Peru at Sacsayhuaman or Machu Picchu. And a lot of people, we've documented it now a lot on Megalithic Marvels, and others have. So I think word's getting out now. Others like, Brian Forster, and they've done some great research on these megalithic walls on Easter Island. So word's getting out. But Captain Cook, the great explorer, he and his British expedition, they showed up to the island in the late 1700s. And he marveled at the precision stone megalithic masonry on the island. And he wrote about how he was particularly impressed by this. I guess there was a huge megalithic wall at the Hangaroa area, which sadly no longer exists, as apparently it was it started to fall apart, and then they used it to build a new harbor. And so you hear stories like that all over the island. Many of the oldest structures that once existed along the cliffs that Captain Cook and other explorers described seeing, they've all disappeared into the sea from pounding ocean surf, landslides, earthquakes, and then just people grabbing them finally and building other stuff. So there's basically one wall left on Easter Island at Ahu Vinapu, which is this amazing megalithic wall. We've got pictures of it on Megalithic Marvels Instagram. We just actually did a video of it too. It's on YouTube. It's just real short, but you can see this wall up close. I mean, there's one section of it that is just, it's not just big blocks, but then there's this tiny strip in the middle, which just shows you it's like a slap in the face that there was some kind of advanced technology to just slip in this circular piece in the middle. Geologist Robert Schock, he talks about Easter Island a bit. He's been there several times. He believes that some of the construction, like this wall, could be as old as 12,000 years. And maybe some of these older Moai that I can talk about more in a few minutes. So, and then when you look at the Andean traditions again in Peru, they describe, that the megalithic monument builders were a race of these tall, white-skinned, bearded type giants. The leader was called Viracocha. So we've got the megaliths on Easter Island. Did you guys know that there was megalithic walls in Easter Island?
Did not.
I did not.
I mean, the big star of the whole thing, Derek, is the Moai, right? So, I mean, that's probably as far as I've heard of. That's why I wanted to ask, because you're talking about these Ahu platforms, and I mean, I love the stuff that you bring up on your site about how ancient, you just said 12,000 years, how ancient these things are, how they predate all of the construction that comes after is like crap compared to what was built before, which is also blows your mind though, because you're like, how does things don't get worse? Like
you can't build something like a redheaded guy can, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, we're not going from iPhones to, next year we're going to have, we're going to have razors again. Like it doesn't get worse. Right. But this is what happened in their construction. Which I think is always fascinating, right? Especially when you take into account that the biblical account of how, Mount Hermon and this, the sons of God, how they imparted this technological, knowledge to humans, and when they had their, their, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Like, I want to say inception. It's not the right word, Nate. When they had their incursion. And it's amazing. I know that like the ancient alien theorists are going to tell you that, it was, the aliens gave them this this advanced technology. But again, we're talking about semantics, and personally, and I know Nate feels the same way. Ancient alien stuff really just, to me, is a way to explain things and remove God from the equation. And it seems like you have to really believe more in a lot crazier stuff than to believe that, this biblical story that's passed down that we see, time and time again, confirmed by the archaeological record. Struggle my words, Nate. Not enough coffee today.
Hey, Derek's reading these ancient explorer names like a pro.
Yeah, he's a champion.
He's like, he's dropping these names, and I'm just getting flashbacks when I was stumbling over reading words live on.
Do you guys have any guess on how many of these exist on the island ballpark?
You want to guess, Nate?
I'm going to guess 70 because there were 70 sons of God ruling over the nations.
I'm going to guess like 200.
Okay, Luke's the closest. There's approximately 950.
Oh my gosh.
Really?
Yeah, some of them are still, half buried. Some of them are really in horrible shape. But if you count them all, there's just about 950 or so statues. And some of the big ones are upwards of 33 feet tall. So that's huge when you see a picture of someone standing next to one of the big, which I think are the original ones. These are massive. Okay, so many of the statues, the biggest one, you can still see it in the quarry. So these statues were quarried right there in Easter Island. And we know this because there's still some that never left the quarry. They're like half carved. And the one that's still there is just massive. It's like 100 feet in length and would weigh about 100 tons if it was standing. So these things are huge. And many of them, though, were transported and then erected out of the quarry and put on these megalithic platforms called ahu, which basically is a Polynesian word for temple, I believe. So, and the fact that they were transported, as heavy and giant as they are, is really one of the greatest megalithic achievements of prehistory in the Pacific world, they say. So you've got these statues in being carved in the quarry. And, there's theories about how this was done.
Derek, I don't interrupt you, but this sounds so much like when we talk about the unfinished obelisk in Egypt. Right, you have the biggest one is still half done.
Exactly. Yeah, the biggest one is still there, right? It never made it out for some reason, and maybe it was because it had a crack in it. But people theorize that maybe they got these out because what they would do is the front of the stone statue was carved first, and then when the front and both sides had been exposed and finished, then the sculptors would start undercutting the back, which was still attached to the bedrock. And again, people theorize that they would do this using axes into the hard basalt, which, man, that seems like a lot of work. And then some theorize that when the statue is finished, they would break it off its keel, and then they would, basically slide it down the slope using ropes, basically somehow tied to giant palm trunks. But I've heard people say that palm trees are very soft. And so that seems iffy that kind of soft palm trees could move these huge multi-ton megaliths with ropes. But either way, we know they came out of the core. The greater mystery is the technical problem of how did they get the stone giants from the quarries all the way to the distant Ahu platforms? And this is kind of a cool oral tradition, again, based off the Rongo tablets, that the Moai were moved with the use of what they call mana. And it's this kind of, I guess, some psychic force where matter yields to the focused intent of a person skilled in this art, and that they were basically moved by vibration or by words of the mouth and commanded to walk through the air. That's kind of the oral tradition. So you've got that. And then many people believe, researchers, that the islanders actually did this by walking them into place. And you might have seen videos on YouTube where people are kind of trying to reconstruct this, by taking a moai, which I think is like a model, and tying ropes around its head. And then you got two teams of people, and they're like wobbling it back and forth on each side. But the fact is, if you do that, it's going to cause all kinds of friction and deterioration on the bottom of these statues, right? Um, But if you look at them, like I think I mentioned this guy, this French explorer that was on the island in the 1860s, Russell. He examined all the surfaces of the statues that were found abandoned in transit, like they were on their way somewhere and they didn't get there. All of them had perfectly polished bottoms, and they were undamaged by friction.
Have we found any of these underwater anywhere?
Yes, there are some underwater. There are some photographs of some that you can see underwater. Yeah, that look like they might have fallen off the beach cliff due to erosion or earthquake. So that's one of the crazy mysteries: is how did they get from the quarry to the stands? If they were walked, they have great they're polished on the bottom. So the coolest part though about the Moai is, again, how Thor Heyerdahl in the 50s revealed these things aren't just heads, they've got bodies. And so again, I think we asked this question earlier: were they buried intentionally? Were they buried due to thousands of years of soil buildup, or due to a sudden flood or worldwide cataclysm? Yeah.
I mean, anything in the research talk about who these Moai were? Because again, I got to go back to they look very similar. All of them look like the same replication of somebody or something.
Yeah. So the Moai, at least the older giant ones that are found in the Rano Raraku, I think it is, quarry. Those could have been made by the long ears themselves. And then the smaller ones with the top knots on their heads, the red cylinders that you find around the coast, I believe those are most likely created by the short ear, maybe the Polynesians that came later. But again, they were all to deify and remember these long-eared inhabitants, which very well could have been Nephilim type hybrids. So I think that's who these Moai are supposed to be representing. Because when you take into account all their strange features, the Moai have got these weird elongated shaped heads. They've got angular faces, kind of long phallus shaped bodies, protruding foreheads. And then have you guys seen a picture of their fingers?
No.
Yeah, I can send you some pictures, but most of the Moai, they have arms, and their arms are kind of pointed down towards where. And and they've got these long reptilian looking fingers. So again, very non-human. So the big question is, who were they? And again, you look at the oral traditions of the island, and you even read the work from really decorated explorers, scientists. There's a woman named Van Tildenberg, a PhD. She runs the Easter Island Statue Project, and she says this. She says the megalithic statues known as the Moai are universally regarded on Rapa Nui today as representations of chiefly deified ancestors. They are the living faces of the past. So that brings us to the reports of blurry creatures roaming the island. There's reports of living giants on Easter Island. So 18th century European explorers described, in some of their writings, that they saw these living giants. So there's a guy named Alexander Dalrymple, weird name. He lived from in the
They're testing you, man.
seven,
Man, you're getting your tongue's getting a workout on this pronunciation.
Yeah. I'm just tipping my cap to you, man.
It's good.
Hey, I want people to know I've done my research because I know this stuff sounds crazy, right? So I want people to be able to Google this, look it up themselves, so that they see there is some teeth to this. It's not just something crazy I read on Google, right?
You could be making
on Wikipedia, right? No, but the source is great.
Hound.
Yeah,
it's like found a large. It's like we would know the difference, you know.
You're like, that's some source material. Yeah, from Ragnar McNogginson. You know, and you're like, oh, dude, totally. I've heard of that guy.
If you sailed to an island back in the day, you had to have a strange name first. It's like it was a prerequisite.
You really had to. You weren't allowed otherwise.
Roggeveen.
Right? They wouldn't let you in the Explorer Club. They're like, Tom, Dick, Harry, you guys are out. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So there's this guy named Dalrymple, and so he lives in the late 1700s. He was a Scottish geographer, and he was the first hydrographer of the British Admiralty. So kind of an important guy. He produced thousands of nautical charts, mapping a remarkable number of seas and oceans for the first time, and really contributed to the safety of shipping back in the 1700s, early 1800s. So pretty cool guy, right? He wrote a book called Voyages and Discoveries in the South Pacific Ocean. And so in this book, Dalrymple documents the ship logs of Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, the guy who was the first European explorer to Easter Island in 1722. And so, again, I'm just looking for source material and information as I was investigating Easter Island, and I was shocked to find several mentions of large living giants that were seen ashore on Easter Island and the surrounding islands by Roggeveen and his crew. And so here's the account that was the most striking, and this is Roggeveen talking. Okay, so it says, quote, "Thus far my narratives will gain credit because it contains nothing in common. Yet I must declare that all these savages are of a more than gigantic size. For the men being twice as tall and thick as large as the largest of our people, they measured one with another the height of 12 feet, so that we could easily, who will not wonder at it without stooping, have passed between the legs of these sons of Goliath."
Wow.
According to their height, so is their thickness, and are all now with one another very well proportioned, so that each could have passed for a Hercules. But none of their wives came up to the height of the men, being commonly not above 10 or 11 feet. So let me stop for a minute. So he's kind of saying, the men appeared to be 12 feet or plus, and the women, 10 feet plus.
Wow.
He continues, the men had their bodies painted with a red or dark brown, and the women with a scarlet color. I doubt not, but most people who read this voyage will give it no credit to what I now relate, and that this account of the height of these giants will probably pass with them for a mere fable or fiction. But this I declare, that I have put down nothing but the real truth, and that this people, upon the nicest inspection, were in fact of such a surpassing height as I have here described. In the countries adjacent to and in the South Sea, giants have been found of a height far superior to us. End quote.
Wow.
Pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah. Dude, the WNBA on Easter Island would have been off the chain.
No, it's interesting too, though, that he already makes a caveat too to like the idea that, hey, look, they're going to push back on this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he saw that coming, and I think it just leads him more credence to his account, being like, you're not going to believe this, but this is what it is, and it's true. It wasn't like he was spinning some fantastical tale and just
that reminds me of the Long Walk.
trying to sell books. Yeah.
Like the long walk, when he just throws
Just
seeing that family of Yeti in
the Yeti family as we're walking through the Himalayas.
Yeah. A lot of these guys, they have these moments where, and I think all of us have that, where if you want to speak the truth and you go against the mainstream narrative, you have that feeling of like, do I go along with what I know I saw, or do I just slip back into society and tell them what they want to hear? I mean, are the local stories about levitation legit, you think?
If we're talking about a pre-flood world out here on Easter Island, and maybe that's where the oral traditions come from, with the locals saying, well, they walked into place. Maybe that's a way of saying there was a technology that they used to cut these things out of the quarry and move them all the way to these platforms. And another thing that might corroborate that is if you look close at the Moai, they're covered in strange designs, especially on their back. And so there's no way these things could have been drug right on the ground, and I would say even on poles and stuff, because there's pretty intricate designs you can see there. So I believe that plays a part in how they were moved, and some of the technology that was used in the golden age, or we want to call the pre-flood, pre-cataclysm world.
But if you just try to imagine like what it was like back then, it was probably, like you were saying, sinister, dark, depraved. Just the golden age was not like a fun time. Even if there was this insane technology, it seems like you probably could feel the darkness. And what are they building? And why are they building it? And it's not just for decoration, right?
Right. Yeah, I like how I listened to you guys' show with Alberino, and then, like I said, I've been reading his book, and he talks about, how the megalithic ruins we see around the world, especially like those in Peru, pyramids, they display this trademark technique, this of cyclopean masons. And these kind of megaliths have been discovered in all four hemispheres of the planet. And so the simplest explanation, he says, for the universality of the megalithic phenomenon is to assume that an advanced global civilization once, populated the earth until it was utterly destroyed in a worldwide cataclysm. And so the general narrative relating to the commingling of God and man, the subsequent procreation of hybrid offspring, and the sudden obliteration of our ruins and cataclysm, it's detected in every written record. And so there's all these parallels to that in the pre-flood legends of Mesopotamia, the Egyptians, the Mesoamericans, and the Polynesians. They speak of, this cataclysm, flood. But I like how Alberino says that if megaliths are the only like representative of the knowledge and technology that was possessed by an elite, caste of beings who ruled over like a Bronze Age civilization that was destroyed in the waters of a flood, then we should expect to find precisely the megalithic ruins we see today and nothing more. I thought that was a great point, being that he's saying it's not so much that it was this advanced golden age civilization, but an advanced fraternity within the civilization, the golden race, right? These hybrids who had the knowledge, had the power. That's why we don't see megalithic cities all over, but we see these spots where they ruled.
I love I'll just say I really love the way that you presented this, even this Easter Island thing, and I love what you do in Megalithic Marvels, because you go to the sources, you go to these sources, you cross-reference them, so our listeners know all this stuff isn't just, we're not sitting up here telling stories. Derek has done a ton of research. He's looked at all the sources, gone back to the people that were there that had eyes on it for those reports, and then looked to back that up with with validity from other sources. And it's fascinating when you actually spend the time to do that. I think we live in a generation, people want to read the headlines and the tweet and the, whatever, 90 characters, whatever. And that's your conclusion. And the reality is that you got to put in the time. Then you got to believe your eyes. So
it's good. No, appreciate those kind words, Luke. And yeah, thanks for your guys' support with Megalithic Marvels. And it's fun to partner and come on your show.